Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost, equal on points, sharing the front row of a grid, in 1989. Oh boy. In qualifying for the 1989 Mexican Grand Prix, Ayrton Senna took an absolutely gigantic pole position by just under 9/10 of a second, equaling Jim Clark's record of 33 poles. Senna would go on to extend that record to 65 poles in his career, which would stand until 2006. Second on the grid was of course his bitter rival Prost, and best of the rest was Nigel Mansell, who was also best of the rest in the championship standings. Ivan Capelli was fourth in the March, despite his March teammate Gugelmin failing to qualify. Fifth was Riccardo Patrese, and sixth was Gerhard Berger on his return to F1 after his fiery crash at Imola. As usual, 26 cars were allowed to start the race, meaning that the last row of the grid consisted of René Arnoux and Nelson Piquet, who would both surely have been gutted to have qualified so low down the order, but relieved to qualify at all. 13 drivers failed to qualify for the race due to the massive grid size of the late 80s, and this included both Coloni drivers who, fun fact, used just one car and 3 mechanics in a token effort to qualify as they awaited the new Coloni C3. Probably the most unexpected successful qualifier was Stefan Johansson, who put the Moneytron Onyx on the starting grid for the very first time. You may recognise the car if you're a regular visitor to my channel, as this is the car depicted in my YouTube banner. When the race got underway, Mansell got a good start and split the McLarens, and he briefly went side by side with Senna as the cars jostled down the long run to turn 1. By the time they got there, Prost was having to fend off from Berger for third place, Senna led, and in the midfield there was drama as Nakajima was spun around by Brundle. The Lotus then got stuck in the rough grass, as ahead of him there were problems for Andrea de Cesaris. Who else? Worse was to come at the Peraltada though, as Modena, Griad and Caffey all went off, and before long the red flags were flying. Luckily the drivers were alright, and after the cars were removed and the barriers were repaired, the race was able to restart. As for what actually caused the shunt, it's not entirely clear, but it looks to me like Modena spun and Griad just couldn't avoid him. Looks like Alboretto's Tyrrell narrowly snuck through on the inside, and Caffey must have spun to avoid him, because it doesn't look like he hit anything. In all honesty, I'm quite surprised the red flags were thrown for this, since they tended to keep the racing running at all costs back in those days, but I guess it was a combination of the damaged barriers and the Lotus parked at turn 1. Luckily for everyone, anyone with damage was allowed to restart in a spare car, whether they made it back to the grid or not. When the race restarted, Senna made a slightly worse start than before, although the McLarens were able to cover off Mansell and prevent him from sneaking through the middle. Senna then got up to speed and managed to fend off Prost into turn 1, and this time the whole pack made it through cleanly as Berger snuck through from 5th to 3rd. At the end of the first lap, it was 2 by 2, as the McLarens of Senna and Prost led the Ferraris of Berger and Mansell, then the Williamses of Patrese and Boutsen. By the way, if you were wondering where Capelli was in the March, he was having issues with his transmission and had restarted from the pit lane, although unfortunately he would be forced to retire after just one lap. What a shame after qualifying 4th on the grid. Meanwhile, woo, yeah! I'm a Dallara and my favourite thing to do is spin, and also get in the way of the leaders apparently. Now, as a race in the late 1980s, we can't do it justice without talking about McLaren, and specifically the rivalry between Prost and Senna. You see, at this point in the race, the McLarens were already starting to rocket away from the opposition, and it looked as if Prost was just biding his time behind Senna as if they were working together, but in reality it was quite the opposite. Senna had started the race on the B compound tyre, which was basically like a modern medium tyre, and Prost had started on the C compound, which was softer, in an attempt to get past Senna early and build a lead. However, despite clearly being quicker in the corners, Prost just wasn't as fast on the straights and actually ended up dropping back from Senna despite the slipstream. Alain claimed that the team was favouring Senna, giving him a better engine with more power, and it was around this time that he began threatening to quit McLaren at the end of the season. In the context of the race, sitting behind Senna was doing no good for his tyres, and the longer he sat behind his rival, the more advantage swung in Senna's favour. On lap 16, the 2x2ness was lost as Thierry Boutsen pulled off with an electrical issue, retiring from 6th place. Then there was more drama as Gerhard Berger retired from 3rd place with a gearbox issue, disappointingly ending what was a magnificent comeback drive. Remember, this guy had been literally on fire just a month earlier, and just ran 16 laps in the top 3 of the Grand Prix, being on fire in a different way. This now meant that Mansell was 3rd, followed by Patrese, Alboreto and Nannini in the points. Also out of the race by this stage were Jonathan Palmer's Tyrrell and Stefan Johansson's Onyx. Oh no! Just one lap after Berger's retirement came the turning point of the race as Prost came in to change tyres. Having run fewer than 20 laps on the C compound, Prost would no doubt have been expecting a set of Bs to be waiting for him at his pit stop, but due to some sort of mix-up he was fitted with another set of Cs.
I've seen this one, this is a classic.
Back into the race he went, knowing he'd have to stop again, and with his faith in McLaren somewhat dashed. Oh, and you thought his day couldn't get any worse? Well, it could, because when he pitted for the second time, his mechanics were slow to change his front right tyre, costing him handfuls of time and dropping him almost a lap behind Senna. Senna then actually did lap him a lap later, driving past him on the straight and once again fueling Prost's suspicion that Senna had a better engine. After all, Senna had achieved in just one lap what Prost hadn't managed in 17, a successful overtake. The order was now Senna, Mansell, Patrese, Alboreto, Nannini and Prost, with only the top 5 still on the lead lap. Oh, and that's Derek Warwick retiring from the top 10 with an electrical issue. Womp womp. On lap 36, Satoru Nakajima found himself beached for the second time. How he managed to get there is anyone's guess, because no replay was broadcast, although I expect it was as a result of an engine failure, judging by that ominous smoke coming from the car. Also out of the race by this point was De Cesaris' Dallara, although judging by how he'd been affecting the race in the early stages, I'm sure this came as a relief to quite a few people. Back at the front, let's take a look back from the dominant Senna and see if we can spot Nigel Mansell in second, fresh off of setting the fastest lap of the race in his bid to catch back up. Unfortunately, bang! That bid came to an end in a very big way on lap 44 as his car expired, throwing smoke and steam into the air as the gearbox well and truly launched itself. Nigel crept around for another lap in the vain hope that he could continue, but eventually he was forced to pull off and park the car right behind where Boutsen had parked his, creating a bit of a car graveyard at the side of the track. This was actually Nigel's 3rd retirement in a row after his unexpected win in Brazil, and his reliability issues were far from over yet. Did you know that there wasn't a single race in 1989 where both Ferraris finished? Yikes! Anyway, pretty much nothing happened in the last 25 laps, and when the race came to an end, it was Ayrton Senna who won, having led every single lap of the race, and his winning margin was 16 seconds over Riccardo Patrese, who was second. 3rd place was Michele Alboreto, who took his final ever podium in Formula 1 in a Tyrrell which had clearly improved massively since he failed to qualify at Imola. 4th place was Alessandro Nannini, 5th was Alain Prost, and 6th was Gabriele Tarquini, who amazingly came home 6th for AGS, despite barely even being glimpsed by the cameras. The rest of the top 10 were Eddie Cheever, Olivier Griard, Martin Brundle and Stefano Modena. 5 cars finished on the lead lap since Senna allowed Prost to unlap himself before the end, and 15 cars finished in total despite the high altitude and its effect on drivers and cars. Guys, before I give this race a score, I want to let you know that I have a Dailymotion account for all the videos that get taken down from my YouTube channel by the pesky FOM bots. Due to the high levels of parody, review and education my videos contain, I believe that all of them fall under fair use, but sadly this isn't always enough. On my Dailymotion, you can find the 1996 Monaco and Portuguese Grand Prix, as well as the 2008 Japanese Grand Prix, and more. I also now have a Twitch channel, where I stream about once a week and would really like to grow my audience. The links to both of these accounts are in the description of this video. Thank you. I gave the Grand Prix a 5 out of 10 overall, which I think is about right for a Grand Prix with so many storylines that still somehow felt slightly underwhelming. The main thing we can take from this race is that even though Prost ended up winning the championship with McLaren, that doesn't mean his relationship with the team was always healthy, and ultimately I think he was always going to go to Ferrari. Ron Dennis later publicly apologised for the confusion over tyres, but as for Prost's lack of power compared to Senna, there was no official word. I'll give the Driver of the Day award for Best Driver to Gabriele Tarquini, who finished 6th from down in 17th on the grid to score AGS's final point in Formula 1. It was also Gabriele's only points finish in F1, which makes it quite sad that it was barely even caught on camera as the broadcast director focused almost entirely on the McLarens. Seriously, there must have been an awesome battle over 6th, 7th, 8th, etc. that the cameras just didn't even bother with, and we got next to no replays of anything. Oh well, I guess that's the 80s for you. Honourable mentions go to Ayrton Senna, who absolutely dominated the race, Alessandro Nannini, who was 4th from 13th on the grid, and Eddie Cheever, who was 7th from 24th. I'll give the Inouye Trophy for Worst Driver to Andrea De Cesaris, who spun, restarted, spun again, had a lengthy pit stop, got in the way of the leaders, and then retired, all in about 20 laps. Drive safely guys, and I'll see you next time.